Okay, so that's the book we're following, and yeah, so basically with uh, topics such as research methods, which is basically the first chapter, I'm gonna explain you the topics, whatever's included in it, but I won't be doing a lot of reading. It is when the studies come where I will do the reading. However, I will pause in between and ask you to read to make sure that you understand whatever I'm explaining. Okay, so we will still
Okay.
follow on that, but other than that, yeah, you just have to really listen to me and keep an eye on the screen. Okay, so we did discuss our chapters and the studies that are included and all the topics that are included. And I told you that the first topic was that the first chapter was research methods, which basically includes how psychologists that conduct these researches or studies that they do when they want to prove a theory. So initially they just have a theory that they essentially move forward and study and evaluate, and then they prove it, or the other way around. So that's basically why they require these research methods, in order to understand and decide how they're going to conduct a research, how they're going to conduct a study, and yeah, just follow, choose the right ways to do it. Once we read, you'll understand better, but that's just the main background, the main idea behind this. So the first thing that you will look at when we're doing research method is experiments. Why experiments? Because they're the most common type of research method that is, or research design that is used, because most sociologists conduct there's types of experiments, which also makes it easier, but most sociologists or most psychologists opt for experiments every time they want to conduct a study or prove a theory. That is one reason why we're going to cover experiments first. The second reason is because it has various types. It is a large topic to cover, which is why they start off with experiments and move ahead from that. There are two branches of experiments that you first need to understand in order to understand any experiment whatsoever, any type of experiment. Those two branches are independent and dependent variable. Now that's what it says over here as well. You can read side by side, but that's what I'm explaining. So there's no major requirement of the reading material as of right now. But right, so the two branches, as I was talking about, is the independent and the dependent variable, whereby independent variable is something that the researcher or something that the psychologist is manipulating, which basically means something that they are fidgeting with or something that they are changing with time or within the research, compared to the dependent variable, which is not something that they're manipulating but something that bears the effect of the manipulation that is done on the independent variable. So in simple words, when you manipulate or when you change something with the independent variable, this change will affect the dependent variable, which is the second variable. So essentially what we're looking at is that every single time we're doing an experiment, we're trying to look at a cause and effect relationship. And this cause and effect relationship is connected by two things, two branches again, independent and dependent variable. So the cause is basically done with the independent variable, where you're changing something or you're causing something, and the effect of that is borne by the dependent variable, which is essentially going to be something or the other. So I'm going to give you an example, which is also given in the book, but that's going to make the concept a little more clear. Let's say we have a test or an exam going on in a particular room, okay, and there are different variables that will basically affect the attention level of an individual giving the exam in that particular room. So let's say you are giving an exam in the particular room. All the things that will affect you while you are giving the exam could be the lighting, could be the seats, could be the temperature of the room, could be the presence of people. All of these things will probably affect your attention level, right? But then let's say in your, just give me 1 second. Yeah, sorry. Right. So, as I was explaining the example, so let's say you're in a room, and the one independent variable which you can, let's say, you're manipulating is lighting levels. Okay. So, you are increasing the light in once, let's say, in the morning slot, you have a lot of light because there's light coming in from the windows, and all of these things. But then in the evening slot of the exam, there is no light whatsoever. Now the light levels is basically your independent variable. How? Because you're manipulating it. In the morning you're keeping more light, you're switching on more lights and everything, and at night you are not keeping any light, you're making it more dark. Now that's something that you as an experimenter or you as a researcher are changing. That is going to be your independent variable, that is going to be your something manipulated, right? And the effect of this cause is going to be on the dependent variable. And in this particular example, the dependent variable is your attention levels, or the dependent variable is your test score, right? So whatever, let's say if you gave the exam in the morning slot, you are more likely to have a better score, which means that yes, your cause was the lighting levels, and your effect or your dependent variable was basically your marks in that particular test. So this is exactly what happens in experiments, that you take two variables, one variable affecting the other, and this one independent variable is something that you are manipulating and checking that after manipulating that one variable, did it affect the other or not. Are we clear till here?
Yes.
Amazing. This is just the first paragraph that I've explained to you. You can read it if you want to, and you'll see that this is what we're talking about. This actually is just till here. They're also talking about the same example that we've studied. You can look at the key terms. I'm gonna give you a minute. Just read the key terms in order to grasp a little bit more professionally and in psychological terms what this means. Are you done?
Yes.
Okay, great. Moving ahead. Come on. They omitted some of the pages. Let me just find the other one. I've got another PDF for this. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. However, I'm just gonna wait till the azan's done. Okay, yeah, so sorry. It's done. Right. So moving ahead. Now they're explaining the course. So once we understand what experiments are, we understand the two branches, which is independent and dependent variable. Now another thing that you need to understand is that there's not just independent and dependent variable. Like I gave you the example that when you're sitting in a room and giving an exam, there are a lot of factors that will affect you. That could be the temperature, that could be the seating arrangement, that could be how many people are around you, that could be the instructors themselves. A lot of things might affect your attention span or your general test score. So for that purpose, that these all the other variables that are present in that particular situation are called extraneous variables. So as the name suggests, they're called extra, right? So they're extra
Mhm.
variables that might affect your experiment or might mingle with your experiment. So your independent variable is something you're manipulating, your dependent variable is something that is being affected by the manipulation. But your extraneous variables are something that you need to control in order to see that the cause and effect relationship between independent and dependent variable is something that is clear and not affected by something else, right? So for example, if I talk about, if I claim that my hypothesis is that more light would mean better test score, now that is the relationship or cause and effect between two variables. But what about all the other factors? So I will need to make sure that I control all the other factors, or I control all the other variables, in order to assure that it is the independent variable that is affecting the dependent variable and not any other extra or extraneous variable. That's why I need to make sure when I, as a researcher, as a psychologist, whenever I conduct my whenever I conduct my research, or whenever I conduct my study, I will need to make sure that all extra variables are controlled. So are we clear till here?
Yes.
Okay, now we need to understand more about experiments, and for that what we're looking at is that are independent variables. So like the example that I gave you, I said one independent variable is like the independent variable remain light, but it was tested in two different conditions. So it was tested in daylight, right? It was tested in the afternoon, and then it was basically tested at night. So it was basically tested in two different conditions. So how many times your independent variable is actually tested, and how many times you're putting this whole relationship of cause and effect to test is another thing, right? So that is another that is something that is called experimental condition. So if you are conducting a particular experiment sorry, if you're conducting a particular condition twice, that would mean that you have two experimental conditions, which obviously they have different types, which we will get into. But let's say, as I used the example, you're conducting one test in daylight and then one test at night. That's basically the same research, the same thing, the same independent variable. However, there are two times that you're testing the, so that testing the hypothesis, right? So that is basically called your experimental conditions, that one was daylight, one was at night. um, then this is one concept, and then there is another condition which is called the control condition, which basically means a condition that you use in order to compare. So your experimental condition, which you, let's say you're conducting a test in daylight and at night, so that's one. But then you also have control conditions which are used for comparative purposes. So you basically use these in order to compare your experimental conditions. So let's say if I want to compare this whole experiment of daylight and night time with, let's say, people who are giving it in a auditorium, so that will be my control condition, that I'm just using that particular condition in order to have a comparative analysis, nothing else. So the control condition is simply in the simply the absence of the experimental variable. For example, in a comparison, so this let's you'll understand it when we read this example. So, for example, in a comparison of the effect of eating chocolate, on paying attention, we might compare either the effect of eating one bar or two bars, which is true experimental condition, or the effect of having no chocolate bars. So, basically, let's say if you're checking that how much does chocolate affect a person's attention levels, so that chocolate being an independent variable, because we are going to change the amount of chocolate that we give a person. First we'll give them one bar, then we'll give them two bar, then we'll give them three bars. So each time this is basically becoming an experimental condition. One group is going to be the one that has had only one bar, that's experimental condition one. The other group is going to be a group which has had two bars, now that's going to be experimental condition two. The third group is going to be the one that has had, let's say, 3 bars, and they're going to be experimental conditions 3. Now these are basically all your experimental conditions, where chocolate is your independent variable and your attention span is your dependent variable. Now I want to compare this with a control condition. Now the control condition is going to be the condition where there is no variable, there is no independent variable, which means there is no chocolate. So your control condition is going to be the condition to check how is the attention level for the people who have zero chocolate. So not 1 bar, not 2 bar, not 3 bars, but 0 bars. That is basically used for comparative purposes. Are we clear till here?
Yes.
Please read these key terms and let me know when you're done. I just want you to just overview them.
Miss, I'm done.
Okay. You get it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Now we've got another thing that we need to look at when we're looking at experiment, that is experimental design. So that basically means how many people you're conducting an experiment with, right? So not just in number how many people, but basically how many groups you will have. So when you talk about experimental design, there are three main experimental designs. The first one is independent groups design. Now what independent groups design means that you are basically using different people for different experimental conditions. So let's say if I go with my chocolate example or the book's chocolate example, let's say I have five different girls for the people who are eating 1 bar of chocolate. Then I have five other girls for people who are eating 2 bars of chocolate. Then I have five other girls for people who are eating 3 bars of chocolate, and I have a totally separate five group of five who are basically the control condition. Now this is basically my independent groups design. Why? Because I am using different people for different conditions. I am using separate people for separate conditions, and that is going to become my independent measures design, compared to my repeated measures design, which basically means that I am going to repeat the people. So for example, if I am using five girls in the first chocolate bar experiment, I'm going to do the first bar experiment first, then I'm going to feed the same girls another chocolate bar and do the second bar experiment with the same girls. So basically, using the same people for each of your conditions is your repeated measures design, as the name suggests that you are repeating the people. And similarly, as the name suggests in the first one, it's independent, which means that they are not connected to one another. So in your independent measures design, you are basically taking different people for different experimental conditions. And for your repeated measures design, you're using the same people for all experimental conditions. Clear till here?
Okay.
Right, and then we have, you can read this, okay. They're basically, why they have given it such a long ways that they're explaining what are the advantages and disadvantages of having this. So I'll tell you the advantages of having independent measures design, which is basically having separate people. So when people there's separate people, there is less chances for demand characteristics. Now what does that mean? Demand characteristics means that you basically give out the aim of your study by mistake. So when you give out the aim of your study by mistake, that is basically demand characteristics, where you have given away the characteristics of your study, which will basically lead for the person to know what your study is about. So so how is that an advantage of independent measures design? Because you're using new people for each stage, they will not be able to guess what your study is about. They only know about one stage, compared to when you're using repeated measures design. Now those people are in the part of all the experimental conditions, and when that is the scenario, they will be able to guess the aim of your study because they've been participating in all the different conditions. So that's one advantage. The second, however, there's also a disadvantage that basically means that there is, different people that you're bringing in, and that means that, there might be individual differences. Individual differences is, let's say one person does not even like chocolate, you just force them, so they don't even care about the chocolate or their attention span. Right now, they just want to puke. So, that also depends on individual differences, because there is a lot of differences in individuals. And if you are taking separate individual, separate group for your experiment, there will be a lot of differences between the groups, compared to when you're taking repeated measures design, because they're the same people over and over again, there won't be that many differences. However, they're also telling us here that this individual differences thing, you can actually eliminate this disadvantage by doing random allocation. That means just randomly allocating them. When you randomly allocate them, this won't be that big of a problem, because you're just randomly placing them in groups and stuff. You're not deciding anything beforehand. Are we clear till here?
Yes.
Okay, repeated measures design, again, the same thing that I explained. One advantage of repeated measures is, again, there is less individual differences because you're using the same people. But then there is also one disadvantage, which is that there is an order effect. Because you've been part of the study for so long, you are doing all the experimental conditions, there is a high chance that you basically now have the practice and you are able to guess the aim of the study, because you are now a part of all the experimental conditions. So you might be able to guess what the study is about. Just give me 1 second. So sorry, yeah. So those are the two. Right, now the third one is actually, sorry, let's just look at one another thing. So one disadvantage, another disadvantage is that there might be a fatigue effect. Now you need to know these terminologies, which is basically order effects, practice effect, fatigue effect, which I will explain in a minute. Fatigue effect is, so sorry, just to fatigue effect is, let's just call it a disadvantage of repeated measures design for now. That's what fatigue effect is. But in reality, in detail, what fatigue effect refers to is that you, actually, wait, let me just get to that. Before I get to that, in order to prevent fatigue effect and in order to prevent order effect, you have to do counterbalancing. Now I'm going to explain four terminologies to you. We already understand that repeated measures design is when you use the same people, and we understand that one advantage is that there will be less participant differences, participant variables, the differences between individuals. There's going to be less of that because you're using the same individuals. However, the disadvantages include, first, practice effect, which basically means because you've been doing, you will do all the experimental conditions, you'll be part of all the experimental conditions, there is a high chance that that there is you've gained practice of that particular thing. So you have a lot of practice of that particular experiment, and that is going to improve your uh, performance in that. That's one thing. Then we have the second thing, which is called the order effects. Now order effects basically means when you sorry, wait, let's just sorry, just I'm so sorry, I need to clarify it better for you. So once we're done with practice effect, we're looking at fatigue effect. Fatigue effect is basically when you get tired of doing the same thing. So let's say if you give me one chocolate bar, make me attempt a test, then give me two chocolate bars, make me attempt a test, I'm gonna get bored of that test. I'm gonna get tired of it. I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna go home now, right? So when you combine practice and fatigue effect, you get order effects, right? So practice plus fatigue effect equals to order effect, which basically means that a person gets annoyed with the order of things, that they generally not annoyed, but they generally guess the order of things. They know what you're doing first, what you're doing next, and how that's affecting that will ultimately affect the research, because the person might be able to guess the aim of the research. What they mean by counterbalancing, now they have said, the researchers say, or the sociologists or psychologists say, that in order to fight these disadvantages you can do counterbalancing. Now counterbalancing basically means, let's say you've got two groups, okay, and you've got two experimental conditions. You've got, so you will, what you will do is, you will make group one do one experiment. Let's say experimental condition A is one thing, experimental condition B is another thing. You will make, this is something I'll have to explain on notes, something I'll have to draw. Where's that? Do you know how to there's this thing that you can share, like a whiteboard. Wait, get this, I found it. Okay, yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Amazing. So when I talk about counterbalancing, it basically means that, let's say I've got experimental uh, conditions, right? So experimental condition, and then let's say the name is experimental condition A, and then I've got experimental condition B,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got, this is my group, right? So what I'll do is group 1 and group 2. So I will ask group 1 to do group experimental condition A first, and I will ask group 2 to do experimental condition B first. Then I will ask group 1 to do experimental condition B, and I will ask group 2 to do experimental condition A. So instead of having group 1 do A first, then B, and having group 2 do A first, then B, I'm going to make group 1 do A first, and I'm going to go make group 2 do B first, and then the opposite way. Do you get it now?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so this is basically counterbalancing. How will this help is basically that it will make sure that they are not getting the idea, they are not getting the order effect, they're not able to guess the aim of the study or know what it is about. So that's basically the general idea. Make sense?
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
Then we have the third one, which is basically matched pairs design, where you basically match the individuals on some characteristics. So this is mostly used for twins, where you can match them on the basis of their looks, on the basis of their DNA, personality, whatever. And when you match these individuals, and then use their sample, you basically prevent any and every order effect, or you prevent individual differences. So you basically, they won't have a lot of differences, because they're literally twins. So that it is, match pairs design is used in order to prevent the disadvantage of having individual differences, because if you use a match pair, that will basically mean that they are similar and hence you do not need to differentiate between them. Are we clear till here?
Yes.
I just want you to read the strengths and weaknesses here and tell me if you understand them.
Okay. Miss?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And
And you understand?
uh, the can you repeat the demand characteristics? Um,
I'm sorry, you're a little unclear. Can you repeat what you're saying?
the demand characteristics.
Right, the demand characteristics, right.
And,
Right,
uh,
so it says so over here. So demand characteristics is basically, as I explained to you, that when you mistakenly give the aim of your study. So, for example, if I want to conduct a study about aggressive behavior and I call you in for my experiment and I am like, listen, how aggressive are you? Or I'm just like, how many times do you hit your sibling, or how many times do you scold your servant? If I ask you all of these questions, you are probably going to understand that, okay, you know what, her whole experiment is about aggressiveness and it's about violence, and that's what she's trying to check, right? So that is basically me giving out the aim of my study. So now me, even though I haven't told you in clear words that my study is about violence or aggressiveness, but because I have been so direct about it, you actually found out ki, oh my god, it's about violence and aggressiveness. So that is basically demand characteristics, is when you mistakenly galti se you give out the aim of your study, you mistakenly just reveal the aim of your study. And when that happens, that basically
Mhm.
exposes your study and that makes it invalid. So when we talk about repeated measures design, because you are making the participant do the same thing again and again and again and again, because you're using the same people for the experiment, that will result them to feel that they you actually that you know that you sorry that will result them in knowing what the experiment is about, because they have been doing the same thing, so they will probably understand. So if you make them, if you keep giving them one chocolate bar and then giving them a test, then another chocolate bar giving them a test, so they will understand that they're checking my attention span, because they're constantly giving me this chocolate bar and making me give this test. So they it will make you, your it will reveal your aim of the study. Make sense?
Okay. Okay, yes.
Yeah, okay. So this next thing is types of experiments. However, I will not start it yet because I do not want to informationally dump you in the first half of this. This is the first class basically. So that's why I'm going to
Mhm.
stop here. But from the next class, I am going to start types of experiment and just get done with the chapter as soon as possible.
Okay.
Okay, you are free to go. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Miss.
Allah Hafiz.